Welcome back for lunch, everyone. Hopefully you're having a great day today. My name is Ken Owens, and with me is Brian, and we are going to talk today about infrastructure management, monitoring, and operating for basically your private cloud fabric. So who here was in the config and deploy session earlier today? Who here went to the keynote? Okay, at least somebody raised their hand. Good. So welcome, everyone, and we appreciate your time coming to this session today. Today we're going to talk about, if you think about the private cloud as three different layers, you got the infrastructure, you got the service delivery and automation, and then you have the application management on top of that. We're going to talk about that underlying layer, which is all the way from physical component management to the fabric for your private cloud and how you can maintain that. And we have a clicker here. So we're going to go through, in this session, two pieces, and it's going to break it down into two sections. The first section is your infrastructure components, the physical devices. What types of things do you do to make sure that they are running the right way? How do you monitor them and ensure that they're getting the resources that you need? Secondly, we're going to talk about monitoring and operating the private cloud infrastructure. After I've built this underlying physical fabric, I want to deploy these services out and build this infrastructure that I can give to my different self-service users. How do I make sure that's performing correctly? And what types of things can we do to help you do that? This should set the stage for all the different deep dive sessions that we have throughout the remainder of the week. So I talked about how we have these three different layers. We have the application performance monitoring. You have the service delivery and automation, the infrastructure management. We're going to be focusing on all that stuff on the right side. It's going to be all the things like, what do I need to do to ensure that the resources that I have can get they ensure that they provide the resources to my self-service users, and how do I ensure that they can perform optimally? And if something does happen, how do I quickly get back and start fixing things reactively? So if you saw this in the first session, we're going to talk a little bit about this because this is really what we mean when we talk about infrastructure components as opposed to private cloud infrastructure. If we look at the infrastructure components, it's that diverse set of resources, all those network devices, those compute resources, and the storage, and how do we bring them all together to provide something that we can divvy out and dole out to different individuals so that they can deploy their applications and their services. So we take this bunch of diverse resource. We can share some of that between different classifications, or we can pull them away from each other so we can have them be dedicated or shared. And we use that to create these logical and standardized offerings that we can then pull together to create private clouds through cloud abstraction. These clouds are basically taking the different physical resources, pulling them together, and then allocating access to those cloud resources by delegating the capacity. But we want to maintain control over how much they use and what kinds of resources they deploy on there, and also after it's been deployed, what kind of resources they have to run and make sure that they're running optimally on the cloud. And then you are going to deploy services on there. And you, as an IT infrastructure admin, may want to ensure that I'm deploying the standardized services, and then I'm also taking standardized approaches to updating these services. If I have that same application deployed in 50 different places, I don't want to have to go to each individual instance and do things for every single one of them. But instead, if I can build a centralized way of updating it and then pushing that out to all 50 of those instances, it can save me some time and some effort. Know that I'm going to do it the same way every time, and that way it ensures that the applications are performing the way I expect them to. So when we talk about monitoring the infrastructure components, it's all the tools that you're really familiar with before, and that is things like Operations Manager, where I need to understand how my applications are performing. I need to be able to trend analysis and understand if I'm giving them or getting enough resources from them. I need to be corrective. If something happens, I need to quickly determine root cause, and I need to find out what is the best way to fix that problem and to quickly fix that problem and get the services back up and online. I have these infrastructure components deployed, and especially if they're my hypervisor for my virtualized environment, I need to ensure that I can have a standard way of updating these services so that they can be patched and updated in a way that is consistent across all my hosts, but is also not going to take down all the other machines that are running on top of that. So orchestrate a way of patching these host clusters. And then lastly, I want to be able to have the tools that can ensure that these resources are available. And if they're not available, find out about it quickly. And if I can, take automated responses to correct those problems. Because I'd much rather have a page at 3 in the morning that says, I fixed the problem, than get up and come into the office to fix it. So through performance monitoring, within System Center 2012, we have the ability to not only see what's happening within your architecture as far as how is it performing, but we can use that to trend analysis over time as to where my problems are and what types of things I need to do to get up to speed and to ensure that these resources are meeting the SLAs that I'm promising to my customers. So one of the things we saw early on in the keynote today was VJ had a report on how is my infrastructure running and where do I think I'm going to pass a certain what would you call it? A certain threshold, and when am I going to start running out of resources? Well, the reporting capabilities inside of Operations Manager allow me to view those types of things. The reporting capabilities inside of the connectivity between Virtual Machine Manager and Operations Manager help me do that capacity forecasting capabilities. The other thing is I want to ensure that when things are happening, I know what's the best way to fix them. What's the best way to take this service that may have a problem, or what's the best way to monitor it so I know when I'm hitting some specific threshold. And to do that, Operations Manager has management packs. And inside of those management packs, we have knowledge. And those knowledge are generated by either the company that created the management pack or internal company knowledge. So by using product knowledge, I can take, well, in this problem, it means that, in this one right here, that you don't have the right configuration set up, and these are the possible resolutions for fixing that. Well, that's great because they can explain to me exactly how, in a generic environment, I can probably fix that. But in my environment, usually, I can't just go and do the straight fix here. I have to go and maybe tweak something else or go talk to my DNS guy to fix something. So what you can also do inside of these management packs is add company knowledge or tribal knowledge that allows me to pass on the knowledge that I have to anybody else who might be seeing this alert, and they can fix it much more quickly. So we give you the ability to not only take the company knowledge, which gives you the straight way how to fix it, but also add your own personal knowledge for the organization in the environment that you have particularly. One of the things we added inside of Operations Manager 2012 is out-of-the-box networking management. So before, you could take different management packs for, say, my Cisco environment or my Juniper or whatever environment, and I could monitor those physical network environments, but only the Cisco side with the Cisco management pack or the Juniper side with the Juniper management pack. How do I pull all of that stuff together and monitor all these different environments? Well, with Operations Manager 2012, we've now built that into Operations Manager so we can discover all these different multi-vendor environments using SNMP protocol to talk to the different switches and routers that you have out there. And then after you've monitored them, you can see things like what ports and what's connected to these ports. You can get a view now after I've monitored them of how these things are interrelated or connected together. So now I have a topology view that allows me to say, okay, this physical machine is connected to this network device, and this network device is connected to these other two, and which is connected to this physical machine. So I can find that whole path as far as how does this machine talk to this machine and find out where the problem is. Is it in the physical server itself? Is it in the networking topology between them? I can pull all those things together. The other thing I can do is I can run my reports on what are my troublemakers? Which of these servers or these switches are not running appropriately? And I can get that information. I can say which ones are the most heavily utilized. And I can determine, do I need to pull some things off of one switch, move them to another? Do I need to replace this switch or something like that? I have that information. I get all this stuff pulled together for me so that I can proactively manage my environment. Besides that, we allow you to optimize for health. I mean, it's great to know what's happening with my systems. It's great to know what's been happening in the past so I can predict future growth. But the other thing is, if something happens, I need to know right now what happened, and I need to know how to fix it. So within Operations Manager itself, we also have the ability for you to alert on certain thresholds, and when those things happen, you can then go in and see exactly what's happening with that element or that device. So I may have a physical server, and it may alert on a problem, like if it's an Active Directory server, it may pass a certain threshold, and Active Directory Management Pack throws up an alert. Well, I can drill in on that device and pull it up and see the whole health of that system and drill down exactly to where that problem is. Not only that, I can see all the knowledge of why that problem is happening, or what, built into the database, what we think the problem is, what we think we can do to fix it, and it gives you all those steps for troubleshooting that problem. So you can quickly diagnose that I have a problem, and then quickly fix it and get back to running. So this allows you then to monitor and manage your entire environment and get quick resolution as far as any problems that may be occurring. And we do this in a couple of ways. We look at the underlying infrastructure. So we look at the OS and the compute and the storage and network resources, and you can monitor the health of that system, of that subsystem. You can also monitor the health of the applications running on top of this infrastructure. So I can monitor things like my databases, my web servers, those types of things. And we have connections, so you know that this database server is running on this physical server. So if there's a problem, they bubble up together. You can also look at things like other applications that are running, and also end user experience, like synthetic transactions. What that means is that we actually have a device that's communicating to this system across the network, and it's asking, hey, what's going on with this system? Is everything okay? Or basically, how long does it take me to get a transaction or a call back? And if it goes above a certain threshold, then it'll alert for you. So that now you can put different watcher nodes in different locations across the world if you have global data centers, and see how quick it is to access the database and find out, am I having a problem with my EMEA data center because it can't connect to my Las Vegas data center or something like that. So we can pull all those things together. And then lastly, we don't just do it for Microsoft products. Like I said, we talk about storage and networking, but we also talk about non-Microsoft systems like your Unix systems or your VMware systems or any of those systems that are out there. We have support either internally in the box or through our partners in their management packs to see how this machine is performing, whether it is a Microsoft system, SUSE Linux, or whatever you have running in your environment. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass it over to Brian, and he's going to show you some of the things that we can do with monitoring within System Center 2012.
Thanks, Ken. Are we switching over here? Yeah. Here we see Ops Manager 2012, where we see the new network summary dashboard, where we can see all our network devices in the network. And then you can click on a network device, and over here you can get the network vicinity dashboard, so you can see all the connection that switch has to all the machines or all the hubs and stuff on that. I have opened that up so you can see it here, the dashboard, whoops, up here. And then you can see all the machines connected or all the networks connection. So now when you build an application that you are monitoring with it consists of several VMs, now you can build and include the network in that view. And up here in the top of it, we can, we hop out of this screen, we can show how many hubs do we want to see from this device. So we can actually see up to 5 it is here.
So one of the important things about that to be aware of is that even if your machines are virtual, they all still go through the physical network when they're talking to other systems. So this way you would have, if you had a virtual server with 50 virtual machines, they would all be pointing off of that one network connection, so you would know exactly where those machines are connected to.
Yeah, and you can click on every device and just ping it directly, or you can see where there's no connection anymore. So if we go back to the network dashboard, we can also see what kind of routers do we have, what kind of switches do we have on our infrastructure. So we go out and discover the topology of the network now, and that's included in Ops Manager 2012 in the network thing. And if we are going down to the virtualization, then we can look at, here we have NWorks installed on this demo set, where we can see the ESX-centered topology on if we have that in our cloud. So we can also monitor that solution exactly like we do on Hyper-V. Go down here and then explore the devices we have, what virtual machines, what clusters do we have on the ESX system. Down here you can see I have a 2-node cluster. If we zoom it in a little bit. So you can see we have the same view if you install the management packs. This is not a management pack that is included. It's another one. You have to buy from NWorks.
Right, so we have partners, and we have over 200 some odd partners or 400 some odd partners that make these management packs that you can use to enhance what you're monitoring and how you're monitoring those systems. We make great management packs for things like SQL Server and Exchange and Active Directory, but if I have this third-party application and I want to monitor it, or maybe I'm monitoring something like my HP underlying physical hardware, I can get the management pack from HP for monitoring that underlying physical hardware to get special capabilities and more insight into what's happening with those physical systems. So I can put that all together, and this gives me that holistic view of how my environment is performing, as well as what's the current health, and if there are any problems, be able to quickly drill down and find out where those problems are and how to fix them. Beyond that, one other thing is, if I'm running a virtualized environment and I have VMM connected to Operations Manager, then if I deploy a service inside of VMM, that service will be deployed as a distributed application inside of Operations Manager. So what that means now is that, like in that morning when you saw that Expense Manager application that Ryan was talking about, when that application was deployed inside of VMM, we created a distributed application inside of Operations Manager so you can drill down into the health of that application. And that way we can use Operations Manager to monitor health, and we can do things to that application within Operations Manager, like monitor, is it performing okay? And then if it isn't performing okay, it can kick off a task to do things like scale that application out or throw an alert that says, hey, we need to fix something inside of there. The other thing we want to make sure of is when you are running this virtualized environment, you want to ensure that the hosts are up to date. You want to make sure that if I have to patch a particular host, that I can patch all of the hosts inside of a cluster without bringing down any of the applications running inside of there. And Virtual Machine Manager allows us to do that. So VMM allows us to get a baseline of my existing hosts, create the baseline by pulling in the updates from your WSUS servers. When you assign that baseline to a host, it checks compliance over whether or not that server has all those updates available to it. If it does, shows compliance at the end of the scan. If it doesn't, then it'll allow you to remediate that host. And at this point, when you remediate that host, you can make that service compliant by updating and installing all those missing updates. What this will allow me to do, though, is it'll do it in an orchestrated fashion so that I don't bring down any of the virtual machines that are running on top of that cluster. So we do this by the following. So first of all, you set up an update server. And then after you have that update server set up and ready to go, you would then go and connect to it with VMM and create your baselines off of there. After you've created these baselines, you attach them to the host, check the host to see if they have updated themselves to the proper baseline. If they haven't, then we're going to do an orchestrated update where each of those servers will connect to the update server one at a time, run the upgrades. At that point, what it does is it basically removes itself from the cluster, or puts it in maintenance mode in Operations Manager, puts it in maintenance mode, removes it from the cluster, runs the updates, reboots if necessary, rejoins the cluster, then takes it out of maintenance mode inside of Operations Manager. Then we do the next one and the next one. So what that means is that all the VMs within that cluster will be migrated around across between the different nodes in the cluster, but none of the virtual machines are going to go down. They're all going to be just migrated off and then migrated back using dynamic optimization. So we've monitored our environment, we've updated any problems that we have, we've kept the systems updated. The last thing we want to talk about here is that what happens if there's a problem? What happens if I lose a system? Well, there are two challenges here. One of the challenges is I got to ensure that I have these systems backed up properly, and we're going to use DPM for doing something like that. The other challenge is I got to make sure that if that application goes down, I can recover it more quickly and bring it back up, whether it's a failure on-site or off-premises. So first of all, with DPM, we can provide this continuous backup where we can take backup of all your different Microsoft environments or any VSS-capable system, and using Data Protection Manager, which then in and of itself can be backed up to either something online, back it up to tape, or we can back it up to another DPM server, which could be local or in the cloud somewhere. So we have partnerships with different companies where we could back up your DPM on-premises server to someplace in the cloud to have them hold the storage for you. Or you can do a DPM to DPM backup. The other thing is we want to automate the recovery of a system. If I have something that either is going to go down or something that alerts me that there's a problem that has occurred, I want to be able to recover that thing quickly before anything happens. So let's say in this environment, I have a SQL server that's running. It's being monitored by Operations Manager. Well, Operations Manager will see that there's a problem with that SQL server because it threw up an alert, and then it will take that, and you can have this function one of a few different ways. Operations Manager could be have the alert thrown, and Orchestrator could be monitoring Operations Manager, and when it sees that alert, it kicks off a runbook. Or Operations Manager integrates with Service Manager, and it could create an incident inside of Service Manager. Then you could have a runbook or an incident template that kicks off an Orchestrator runbook when a problem occurs inside of Service Manager. So you have two different ways of doing this. So in this example, the application threw a problem, Operations Manager discovered it, Orchestrator, which was looking at Operations Manager, pulled that alert and started to kick off a runbook. Well, in this example, the automation that I built in was that SQL Server, if there's a problem with this SQL Server, I would deploy a new one, back up the original SQL Server off of that database, and deploy it on the new server. So all that I did was Orchestrator kicked off a virtual machine creation process through VMM, through the IPs to VMM. But also what it did was it created an incident inside of Service Manager. So if I have a different ticketing system, maybe I don't have Service Manager, so I don't have that connector between Ops Manager and Service Manager, I could use Orchestrator to be that thing that kicks off that ticket inside of Service Manager. It really all depends where you want that guiding process to go. Do you want it to go through Service Manager or through Orchestrator? After it's continued on and it's deployed that virtual machine, the next step is Orchestrator tells DPM, okay, back up that database server, and then deploy that instance or move that instance basically to SQL Server 2. Bring down SQL Server 1, and now we have a nice, happy database running on my SQL Server 02. And at that point, we've also, Orchestrator, because everything was successful, has closed that ticket inside of Service Manager. So we've been able to go that whole step and process through automating, finding the alert, going through the tasks that I would normally have to do, and opening the incident so I have that audit tracking, and then closing it. Now, in examples here, if there would have been a problem when I went from the first SQL Server to the second SQL Server, then I would have built in error checking and redundancy that would have thrown an error to Service Manager or my ticketing system that would have said, hey, this problem still isn't resolved. You need some human intervention to fix this thing. Or I can build in multiple different tries. Like we have another example where I have a web server, and that web server goes down. First thing it tries to do is restart the spool. The second thing it does is restart the web server. The third thing it does is redeploy a new web server. And the fourth thing it does is just say, hey, I give up, and pass it back to the admin. So you have the ability to build all those different customizations inside of there to automate as much of this tasks that you would normally do over and over and over again, and do that. So really we focused today on this first piece of the presentation on that underlying physical infrastructure, or the components, and how do I make sure that they have their sites, their systems put together, that I know exactly what's happening there, that I can take quick action to fix them when there's a problem, and I can standardize my approach to keeping them up to date and ensure availability. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what do I do at the private cloud level to make sure that it's giving the resources I need to my applications that are running on there. And here we're focused on making sure that your systems are optimized, that I'm using the amount of resources that I have, and I'm using them efficiently. I'm not buying for peak and then just running this much resources, but I'm buying for as much as I need. And I'm also then controlling who has access to these resources. I want to standardize my approach to how they deploy their services, but then I also want to standardize my approach to how they keep them updated. And then lastly, I want to ensure that this cloud environment that I have is right size for me now and will be there in the future, so I can ensure that I have the proper and appropriate resources available to me. So the first thing we've done is that within VMM 2012, we've introduced this capability called dynamic optimization. And what dynamic optimization does is it allows me to look at the underlying physical resources and the virtual machines that are running on top of there and rebalance them on the fly if something goes wrong and I'm starting to fill up all the resources on a specific box. So we're monitoring each of the systems, and when that utilization goes above a certain threshold, then what we'll do is we will migrate some of those virtual machines off of that system to rebalance the workload. As we migrate those virtual machines off, then the workload on all these systems goes below the threshold again, and everything's fine until maybe one of those other systems goes above the threshold. At that point, we move that virtual machine around, so we've moved these virtual machines around across my system, and maybe at that point I'm running okay. So we have the ability to do this automatically, or to make it a manual process where it says this is what should happen, but until you kick it off, it doesn't actually do it. The other thing to know about dynamic optimization is that we're monitoring these systems over basically a weighted 10-minute period. And what happens is we check it over this weighted 10-minute period, and when we see that the systems have gone above a threshold for a certain amount of time, we'll move it around, even if your dynamic optimization threshold was set up to something like 30 minutes. So we'd take the last 10 minutes, or if it was set at 5 minutes, it doesn't matter. We take the last 10 minutes to start determining where to move these machines around to. The other thing to be aware of here is that you have the ability also to specify aggressiveness. And what aggressiveness allows me to do is aggressiveness allows me to say, I want to move these virtual machines even if they only give me a 0.2 or 0.4% benefit. So I have the ability to set high aggressiveness, medium high, medium low, medium, and low, I guess they are. And in each side of these, if I specified it at medium or higher, so medium, medium, high, or high, then we'll migrate these virtual machines around even if I'm not above that particular threshold. So let's say my threshold was 80% CPU utilization. Even if I was running at 50% and 20%, I would migrate them around to make them closer so that more of my systems were more running at, both of them running at about 35%, because of the fact that I'm high aggressiveness there, or medium high. If I was low aggressiveness, then if it was 79% and 2%, it wouldn't migrate the VMs around because I hadn't passed that 80% threshold. So we do a couple of things here. We keep the cluster balanced. We're going to do it via live migration, so we avoid any type of downtime to those applications. We're going to look at all your different resources. We're going to look at CPU, disk, network, and memory, and determine whether or not, or what basically your star rating is, and whether we can move it around and gain any benefits by doing that. And you can decide whether it's manual, automatic. You can decide how often it happens, and you can decide how aggressive you're going to be in that. We've also added for your Hyper-V systems this thing called, so I guess the last thing here is, this doesn't matter if it's a Hyper-V cluster, a VMware ESX cluster, or a Citrix Xen server cluster. You can still turn on dynamic optimization. It's set at the host group level, and it'll take over for you. One other thing to consider here is that if it's a VMware environment and you have DRS turned on and you have dynamic optimization turned on, you're not going to want to have both of them turned on at the same time. You'll want to turn off one, either DRS or dynamic optimization, for that VMware host group or for that VMware cluster. because they're going to affect each other, where one will move something, then the other will move something back maybe, and then it'll just go back and forth that way. The other thing we've added for your Hyper-V systems is something we call power optimization. And power optimization allows me to shut down systems to free up resources if my load goes down below a certain amount. So if I have these virtual machines running across these different systems, and the load after I've powered down systems would fall below this optimization threshold. So if my load right now is 30%, but if I shut down all these systems, it's below 30% on the remaining systems, then I'll hit that threshold and I'll start moving systems out. So what we'll do is we'll use dynamic optimization or live migration to move these systems off of those boxes, and that threshold will still be below that threshold. We'll power off the machine that was hosting those VMs. Then over time, a day will happen or whatever, throughout the day, the load will pick up. We'll surpass that threshold. At that point, we'll power on the machine. And then after we powered on the machine, because of things like dynamic optimization, those virtual machines will move over and off of that system and respread the workload across my farm. So what this means is that if I am powering off a system, the remaining resources, that's where the threshold is when I set this. So it's the threshold against the remaining resources in the environment. Again, we're considering the same resources that dynamic optimization is considering: CPU, disk, network, and memory. Some of the important things here to note are, one, that when we power off these physical hosts, we're not going to invalidate the cluster. In other words, we're not going to shut down so many hosts that the cluster still won't be able to function. We're also not going to shut down the machines if the remaining systems can't handle the load. In other words, you're beyond that threshold that you've set when you shut down all these machines. We use live migration to power them down, but we also use the out-of-band management connectivity to start and stop those physical machines. So we'll shut down the machines via your HPILO, your Dell DRAC, whatever, and then we'll use that as well to start them up when we want to restart those systems. So the next thing we want to talk about is controlling access to the cloud. So here, I have this cloud environment that I've created. I've created my clusters, I'm managing my clusters, and I've created these things called clouds on top. Well, I want to ensure that only the right people get access to those resources. As we saw in the demo earlier today that Ryan O'Hara did, he was able to use Service Manager and automatically request access to those resources. So we do that by allowing you to create these things called user roles. And the user role is what we allow you to access the individual clouds, but also how much of those cloud resources you have to access. So inside of the user role, you have the ability to assign actions that user can perform. So you have the ability to assign things like, can I author a virtual machine or a virtual machine template? And usually for your self-service users, you would say no to that. You would also have the ability to deploy these virtual machines from template or just deploy virtual machines in general. Normally, you would probably pick deploy from template because you would want to specify what base images and what templates that they can deploy from instead of having them just create any type of OS that they want on your network. Other things you want to make sure you have is things like save, start, stop, shut down, those types of things. So we were talking in the earlier session, definitely if you're going to have stop, you should have shut down as well because you don't want them to just hard power off these machines. And then lastly, one that I don't have checked here that you probably would want would be remote connection. So if they're running something like Hyper-V Manager or something, they could connect to that virtualized environment. So you can do this by creating custom roles. You can create a user role for any of your particular users. And those users are fulfilled via Active Directory, so usernames or groups. So I create a group called All Users, or maybe I call it MMS users. And then inside of there, I can put individual Active Directory accounts, or I can put groups. When I log into Virtual Machine Manager or App Controller, I choose what user role I have assigned to if I have more than one assigned to me. And the other thing is, I can change these dynamically. Maybe when they're doing their initial setup, I give them full rights, but then after they've initially set up and they're just running it along, I can drop it down to just start, stop, and view, that type of thing. The other thing I can specify is quota. And the reason we have this, we talked about this in the config deploy, but we're also talking about in the monitor and operate, is that your user roles are going to change dramatically, way more than things like creating new clouds and those types of things. But they're also for configuring everything, but also ongoing management of your systems. And here we can set up things like, what are the quotas for my environment? How many virtual machines or how big a set of resources can I create for the entire group to use, as well as for any individual user within that group? So if I had a development environment, and that development environment I wanted that whole development group or team to only be able to deploy 50 virtual machines, I can set up the group, give them an access of 50. And let's say there are 12 people in that group, and every time they deploy their application, it's 5 different virtual machines. Well, I can specify at the member level a certain number of VMs that they can deploy. And in this example, I have 10. So any one particular user could deploy 2 sets of their application because they have 5 VMs per set of application. But any one user could deploy, that third one because that would be over the 10 that they have. But only 5 of those users could deploy those 2, or I could deploy a total of 10 sets of those applications because that would be 50 VMs. So when that 11th guy or that 12th guy wants to deploy one of those applications, they couldn't. And that way allows you to protect your clouds from any one user monopolizing or any one group monopolizing all of those resources. Now, one of the last few things I want to talk about here is I want to talk about one of the things that we've added within VMM 2012 is this new approach to how we manage services. A service is multiple tiers of an application, because from everything I see now, most applications are not just a server. They're multiple servers, and each server has 1 or more virtual machines, depending on how that application is deployed. So what I can do within VMM is create these service offerings. And a service is designed to be driven off of a template. In other words, I have this template that provides the single source of truth for what is composed of the virtual machines running in that service. It talks about what's the guest OS, how much RAM is assigned to that VM in that tier. It's how much of the, what kind of VHD file it's using, all those different pieces of information. And not only that, it tells me how many of those virtual machines are within that tier. I can utilize that because if I have a tier, and let's say it has 4 virtual machines deployed, and I want to upgrade that tier, I may not want to bring down the entire tier, do my upgrade, and then bring it back on. But instead, do more of a staggered approach to updating. Maybe bring down 2 of them, update those, and then bring down the other 2 after the first ones come back up. So we have this concept called upgrade domains, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means in the demo. The last thing is that we have the ability of allowing you to specify how do I want to update this service. And this is important because what it allows me to do is it allows me to specify the time it takes to upgrade that application, as well as am I upgrading just the app on top, or am I going to update the whole virtual machine that's running on that system? So we have this thing called in-place updates. And an in-place update means that I can make a change like to, say, the amount of RAM that's assigned to the virtual machine, or I can make a change to the underlying application that's running on that virtual machine, and it will take that application and it will pull that application off and it will deploy the updated version of the application and it'll start it up. And it's a fairly quick operation to do an in-place type upgrade. Or let's say I'm going from Windows Server 2008 to Windows Server 2008 R2 in my service template. That's a pretty major change, and going through the steps on running all the different update capabilities inside of that VM itself probably is not going to be something I'd want to script and automate. Instead, what if I had the virtual machine here and I could just replace the underlying VHD with the updated version that's running on that new version of Windows Server? It would make my life so much quicker to redeploy basically that virtual machine, give it the same name and IP and everything that the old one had, and then just redeploy the application on top of that. So an image-based update doesn't replace the application on top, but instead replaces the virtual hard disk and then redeploys the application on that virtual hard disk. So let's take a look at what these look like. In theory, I mean, they're basically the same. First of all, I have a template, And inside that template, I have the configuration of my service, whether it's multiple tiers, and each of those tiers, what the configuration is. Well, I want to update that application. So the first thing I do is I deploy an instance of that application so that I can update later on. And let's say this is version 1.0. Well, if I want to make a new copy of this, if I want to update this template, I can't update a template that has the service deployed against it, but instead I make a copy of it. And inside that copy, I modify whatever changes I want to make. In this case, let's say I updated the number of processors, and maybe I added a new tier or something like that. Whatever changes I make those changes, I publish it, and I apply it to this VM, or this service. At that point, the service says, hey, okay, I know I have an update, but I'm not going to update it until you push the update. When I push the update down, what it does is it basically takes that machine and then through upgrade domains, updates the first one of the instance, updates the second, the third, in a staggered approach. If I had one upgrade domain, it would upgrade everything. If I had 2 upgrade domains with 3 servers, it would upgrade 2 VMs the first time and then the 1 VM the second time, or 1 and 2, depending on how it works. But it's not going to update all of them at the same time so that you don't have total outage of that tier. Same thing, very similar when I do image-based updates, except it just takes a lot more time. So in image-based updates, I'm looking at the system, I have the service, I've deployed the service, so I have this version of the service that's out there. But in image-based update, if I want to make an update, I don't update the config inside the VM or the application. Instead, what I'm updating is the underlying VHD file. So I say, okay, I want you to do an image-based update. I want you to go from this version of the VHD to this one, because now I have the updated drivers or whatever. Maybe it's a service pack update or something like that. Again, publish it, set it for the machine, and then push the deployment down. Again, it's going to use upgrade domains, and it's going to upgrade them in the order so I don't have everything down at one time if I have that set. And then it's going to update the version of the application. Nice thing about this is I can go forward as well as back if I need to. So I have the ability to quickly upgrade and determine I have a way to build a repeatable process for upgrading these services across all my different organizations without having to manually go to each service. I can kick it off for this one, then this one, then this one, without having to go in and modify and update each individual virtual machine. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass it over to Brian again and have him show you what that looks like inside of VMM and the steps you have to take to do that update.
Yeah, here we have VMM 2012. Has anyone been playing with it? No? A couple of guys?
A few of you.
You might have seen it, but this is the overview of your infrastructure, your private clouds, your host. Down here you can see I have 31 virtual machines on 3 hosts, but I got 3 different clouds on these 3 hosts. And down here you can see the performance, the optimization, how much CPU, memory are we using, the disk I/O, the network over time. And that's constantly updating from the clients. So if we go down to the library, you can see down here in the library, I have VM templates, as you know already, templates to the virtual machines with OS on top of them. But down here we can make service templates. As Kenan here talked about, service templates consist of several virtual machines and their connections between them. We can do an update on them, or we can just look in the designer how it's configured. And in here you can see the virtual machines, how they are running. We can see over here we have the web server, and the web server has the capability of growing from 1 instance to 5 in the cloud. So several of these VMs everyone can have independent how many virtual machines they can grow from a minimum to a maximum. And you can see over here the templates. That's the usual templates we use to deploy virtual machines. But now we are deploying a whole service and not only a virtual machines. If we take one virtual machine and double click on it, then we get that template and we can see what's configured inside it. How do we configure this virtual machine, the amount of memory. And if it's coming up in 2 seconds, we can try and change this template and then deploy it to the service and see how we do this in-place upgrade of the service. We can go down here and look at the hardware configuration. Take the memory. It's right now 2 gigs of memory. Let's change it for 3 gigs. So when we update it, we have 3 gigs in it. We can deploy the OS as we have, but look at the new things down in the OS. Now we can deploy roles and features. Not only the OS are we deploying, but the roles and features. So now we can install the DHCP server or the domain controller, and then configure the domain controller by scripts in the application in here. So here you can put in scripts for post and pre-configuration of DHCP. So it's not only the OS we deploy, it's services and features as well on Windows. And when we update it, then we validate what do we change in this service template, and is it valid on our platform, on that cloud where we are using this template. Then we are trying to save and validate it. And let's see if we can publish it, this change to the VM. Oops, come on. It has to wait a second. Just lost my connection. That's why. 2 seconds, then we'll be online. I thought you was the god of demos.
I'm mad at you right now.
But you called Murphy anyway. Yeah, in the meantime. Yeah. And in a second, you'll see how we can update the stock trade service that we are running on the VMM when we hopefully get the connection out.
So when you have a template, you can make changes to the service template as long as that service template doesn't have a VM that's deployed against it. VMs that's already deployed against it, then the next thing you have to do is you have to actually create a copy of that template and make your changes to that copy instead of the original.
Yeah. It's trying to get the connection up and running now.
So I can populate these templates for my app where it wants to deploy an application that has a web server or a SQL server. Is that right? Templates for those?
Right, so templates that you create, the service templates that you create can be for any type of multi-tier application or even a single VM type application. We have a lot of people that instead of creating, with VM in 2012, instead of creating VM templates and using those and giving those to their self-service users to deploy, they're actually taking and creating one VM service templates or one tier service templates that their end users can deploy. And the reason for that is because then you can start doing some of these upgrade things that you couldn't do with just a standard VM template. All right, we're getting there. So the other thing when you talk about services inside the service template, when I have an application deployed against a service template and I make a copy, we have this chain and this list of all the different templates that are inside that were built off of the same template. So what that allows us to do is it allows us to then, when we have these virtual machines ready that we want to start deploying this template, we can then choose which way in the tier. And you can go up and you can go back. If I made this change and I didn't like it, I can go back to the previous version of the tier. So he'd already made a copy of it, and then he has the service template there, and that's called demo 1.5. Now that right there, he would then have to publish, which he already did, out to the world so that it can now be seen against the different templates that are out there. So he has a version 1.0 there, and he has the version 1.5.
Yeah, we have published the 1.5, so now we can do and go back to the configuration, because I just tried the demo before this, where we published it. So now we're going the other way around. We are changing from 2 gig down to 1 on the IIS server. Come on.
VMs and services. So go into VMs and services. Or did you lose connection again?
And up here we can see the service. And down here we should have the ionized service. It already changes back to 1 gig.
So there's the web server VM that we have that we want to start deploying an update to it. So now if we right click on that if we right click on the service template at the top, then right here he can start determining which template he wants to move to by just simply picking set template. And now he can replace the existing one with the version that he wants to use. So he has the two 1.0 and the 1.5, so he's going to pick the 1.5 since it's set to the 1.0. The nice thing about this is it allows you to now see what are the settings that you've already applied. So we have the ability inside a template to specify replaceable parameters, and if you wanted to change one of those, it'll show them in here, and you could actually make changes inside of the template right now. You can also decide whether you want to do the updates in place or via the deploying a brand new virtual machine with the same settings. So you have those choices.
And now we are reviewing the update for the memory. Is it allowed that we can make those changes on this cloud and on this virtual machine?
So you kind of saw in the background over there on the right, it was actually running all these different jobs. Like, what's the difference between this template and the existing template, and what are the differences? And we can see in the web tier that it does see a difference there.
So if you selected one of the new settings,
If I selected a what?
if you selected one of the new settings, what would happen?
So that would do the replace the VHD, pick up the application, replace the VHD, and then redeploy the application on top of it. So keep the existing settings, but deploy me a brand new VHD. So in place means that I'm going to keep that VHD there. The other one means I'm going to replace the VHD with an updated version of that.
So you can still have the same number of VMs running.
Right.
You're not adding another VM.
No. Now, if my new service template had an additional tier, then it would start deploying that new tier when I went up to that next level, right? So it would do that. Or if my new template said the minimum was 4 and I only had 2 deployed, then it would update some more there, that type of thing. But it's not going to create a new VM unless it needs to.
As you can see here, we're changing from 1 to 3 gig on the virtual machine. And then we click finish, and then it's starting to change it. So in 2 seconds, we'll see down here, it will change. It will stop the virtual machine to change in the configuration of the virtual machine. Now it should have 3 gig instead of 1.
Is this a graceful shutdown? Yes, it's sending a shutdown command into the VM to shut the VM down through the VMM service. I mean, through the integration components, basically, for that VM.
And as you can see now we are back to 3 gig. So it shut down, changed the configuration parameter, and started up again.
If you have multiple VMs in that tier, then obviously if you had upgrades being set, it would bring down some, fix those, boot those up, bring down other ones, rechange those, and bring those up. And like Brian was telling you, if I needed to go back because I didn't like that change, it didn't work, I can roll back to an existing version of the template as well by just following these exact same steps, but setting it to the older version of that template. And it's back up and running now with the 3 gigs. So the last thing we want to talk about is one of the nice things that we've introduced with VMM 2012 and Operations Manager, and that is in the connection between them, and that is some really good reporting capabilities that you can do of your underlying private cloud infrastructure. So one of the things that I need to know, and like what Vijay was talking about in the keynote this morning, is that I not only need to know how my system is performing now, but it would be nice to know what's the trend been over the past and what's the forecasted growth rate that's going to be. And we have the ability within VMM and Operations Manager using SQL Server Analysis Services to take the past trend of a certain period of time, whether it be 1 day, actually you should start at 10 days, but 10 days or more, and forecast up to 30% beyond where I am today. So if I did 10 months of previous historical data, then I could do 3 months of forecasting. And we use SQL Server Analysis Services to determine what that use is going to be. Because what happens is this. I don't want all of us, if I had something cyclical happen where every 3 months it just got really busy for a little while and then dropped down, I don't want to be caught unaware 3 months from now when I've grown a little bit, have more resources used, and now all of a sudden that peak comes and really messes me up. So by using this analysis forecasting, I can see what my historical trend has been, and that kind of helps me gauge what my future is going to be. The other thing is I always want to make sure I have a cushion at the top to handle any of those peaks or valleys, those peaks in the load. So maybe I don't want to ever use more than 80% of my resources. And if I see I'm trending up and I'm going to pass that 80%, it might be a good time to buy now to expand my clouds so that I don't ever pass or surpass those resources. So I need to know what's my utilization now. I need to know what my trending has been, and if possible, forecast what it's going to be like in the future. And VMM allows you to, or System Center 2012 allows you to do that through the connectors between VMM and Operations Manager. So within Operations Manager, I basically open up reporting, choose the date range, pick the servers I want to deploy, and as you see here, they're both Hyper-V hosts and ESX hosts. And then it gives me a nice little report of how they're performing right now. Well, the other thing I may want to know is how it's going to be in the future, and I can build a little trending report like you saw earlier today. This one didn't transpose well when I put the new template on, but basically it says over the past X amount of months, what's it going to be like for the time after that. And I can just watch the report, and we can see how it moves up and down on that report. So what I'm going to do now is flip it to Brian and let him show you some of the reporting and how that reporting works inside Operations Manager.
Yeah, over here in Ops Manager, in reporting, we have the connector to the Virtual Machine Manager, and down here we can do the reporting from Virtual Machine Utilization, and we can open it up and add some parameters. What kind of virtual machines will we see? We add some objects over here. If I have the name of the virtual machines, I can search and find some of them. And here you can see all the virtual machines there is on the host or the several hosts, and VMM is managing. Let's take the databases and see how they are performing. And maybe the backup and the domain controller, and let's add them. And then run the report. And now we are going to see the resources, what kind of resources consumes those virtual machines. So you can see down here the average CPU, the average memory, the total memory, how much are they using, and are they growing on the disk size. And when you do those reporting, you can then publish the reporting. So you can go up here and say, export them and do the PDF, or you can publish them to a SharePoint server. So you can see those dynamic changes of the report whenever you schedule them. Or another thing you can do in Ops Manager, you can see the stock trade that we just updated. But in Ops Manager, we can also make a dashboard of the, just a second, up here. We can make a dashboard, and you can see here, now I have a dashboard on the stock trade application that we are running in the virtual environment. So, and these dashboards, you can export them to a SharePoint site and put them on a front-end SharePoint site for the users to see how their business applications running. So it's not only the IT that is seeing what's going on, you're also publishing the data directly out to the apps owners.
So this gives you a great view as to what's happening now and what may be trending and happening in the future. Things to think about here is, in that report you ran with the VMM server, it was over the past 2 weeks. So over the past 2 weeks, this is the kind of utilization that I've been using with these systems. You can really pick it, I want it over the last quarter, the last month, years, or your own custom time. And definitely by posting these out on a schedule to a SharePoint site or something like that, people can just go in and look at them and have the current updated stats as to what's going on with this system without having to give everybody access into the Operations Manager console or into the Operations Manager web views. All right, so we've talked about a lot of different things. Really the main thing here is how do I ensure that the physical resources that I have are going to give are going to perform appropriately. If I do have a problem, how do I fix it? And how do I ensure that the clouds that are running on top of them are getting the resources they need? And if they aren't, how do I readjust them and plan for future growth? And that, all these things that we talked about today are going to be our sessions throughout the whole week this week, and you'll be able to get a lot of information about how these things work. So we've talked about both on the private cloud infrastructure components as well as the private cloud infrastructure. How do we monitor and manage those? If you have any further questions, we'll be up here for the next 15 or so minutes. And we'll be also, we have many sessions throughout the week. So is there any questions right now that we can answer to the audience? Can you see my SAN utilization report? This machine's not backed up to a SAN, so it wouldn't have any data inside of it. We could show you what the things look like, but it's not going to have any data inside of them. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, so dynamic optimization, I talked about dynamic optimization. There's also this thing called PRO, or Performance Resource Optimization. Does that go away, or what's the difference between that? Is that the question? PRO doesn't go away. But a lot of what people were using Pro for was moving virtual machines around as the load changes. We wanted to take away the time it took to go through to Operations Manager and have trigger inside Operations Manager and then come back to VMM. So we do that all inside of VMM today. Other things like Pro packs with your, let's say, your NetApp server or F5 or something like that, those Pro packs are still totally valid. And we're working with our partners to update those for VMM 2012 and Operations Manager 2012. So Pro is still a viable solution, but all of our customers said, for this stuff that's straight VM virtualization stuff, why don't you guys just do it inside of VMM? So we're doing that. Yes?
A question about role groups.
About what groups?
Role groups.
Role groups, okay. The user roles?
When you have a role group quota for the whole, all members,
Uh-huh.
does that apply per cloud, or is it a global application across all clouds at once if that role group has access to one cloud?
So the question was, if I have a user role and I've set quota for that user role, is it for all the clouds that user role has access to, or per cloud? And the thing is that for quota, it's per cloud. So if I had 10 clouds that this one had access to, then each of those clouds I could set a different quota for both the user and the group. But the actions are system-wide. We're looking at what we can do to modify that a little bit for future, but for right now, that's what it is. Do you have the VMM going?
Yeah, I don't see it here. Inside here. Where is it?
So close this and go to settings, user roles, and yeah, just like open up one of those. So inside the user role right here, under scope, you can choose which clouds they have access to, and then when you click another cloud here, just click like 2 clouds. Then what you see here is I have quotas. I have 2 quotas. I have quota for, click on that one, quota for my Contoso, and then quota for Windows 8. So I can set the quota per, but I only have one place to set actions.
And you can set it per the group and then per the individual person. So
Yeah, the entire quota
if
for
they're a
the
member of a
user role.
group, but they can only deploy 2 servers, but the whole group has 10 servers. But each member can only deploy 2, or whatever you set it for.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, question?
Yeah, for Ops Manager, how does it handle right-sizing capabilities in VMM as servers are shut down and brought up?
So how does Ops Manager handle right-sizing capabilities for VM that servers are brought down, shut up, or brought back up? Within VMM, if I do the shutdown command, and if the shutdown is brought in from VMM because of something within VMM, like because I'm doing a task update or something like that, then it will actually go into Operations Manager and put it in maintenance mode before it brings it down. But if it's something where I just shut the machine down, I think that wouldn't be put in maintenance mode before Operations Manager. If I just like right-clicked on the host and said shut down. As far as if I put it in maintenance mode in VMM, I think it puts it in maintenance mode in Operations Manager. As far as VMs themselves, I don't think there's a correlation there, except if I do it maybe at the service level. I'm not totally positive on that. If you go to the service session for VMM, the guy who's talking about that, Stephen Barron, he's the guy who handles the Operations Manager connector too, so he can help you with that piece. All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your time today.